Have you ever had the feeling that someone has completely changed your life, even without wanting to? That a person, with his mere presence, triggered a 360-degree transformation within you? What if I told you that you were that person for someone? If I told you that without realizing it, have you been the catalyst for the change they didn't want to, but they needed desperately? The truth is that not everyone changes by inspiration. Some change because they can no longer bear the reality you put in front of him. You haven't just motivated them. You compared them with their stagnation. You forced them to look inside yourself and to see what they had avoided for years. You broke their illusions. You exposed their apologies. You demolished their certainties. And now they think differently. They move differently. They live differently. But all this, it's your fault. In this video, you will find out exactly how you have unleashed this change in them. Prepare, because what you feel could show you yourself in a way you never imagined before. And once you have seen this truth, you can no longer go back. There are moments in life in which the soul is located in front of a mirror, but not one. A mirror that does not distort, does not soften, does not mind. A mirror that reflects the truth without filters, without excuses, without illusions. And for someone, you were that reflection. In the world, we often surround ourselves with people who comfort, who strengthen convictions already rooted, who avoid asking difficult questions. But you don't. You were the mirror that showed what could no longer ignore. Their stagnation, the wasted time, the forgotten potential. Just as the Word of God says, "The light came into the world, but men preferred darkness to light because their works were evil." John 3:19. The truth is uncomfortable yet necessary for transformation. Do you remember how Jesus Christ faced the Pharisees? He did not caress them with sweet words, but with sharp truths. He was the light that unmasked hypocrisy, forcing those who listened to a choice: continue to live in the lie or accept reality and change. And you did the same. You have not allowed those around you to remain blind in front of their limits. Without saying anything, only with your way of life, did you oblige? Who observed you to ask questions? What am I doing of my life? Why am I not growing? I am wasting the gift that God gave me. The Bible teaches us that those of truth listens to the voice of Christ, John 18:37. And whoever looked at you saw a reflection of the truth that could no longer ignore. Many build trafficking castles to justify their immobility. I can't do it, I don't have time, maybe one day. But your example has hit these walls. You have lived faith in action. You didn't stop at the words. You walked, you ran, you fought. And who was stopped observing you had to deal with their immobility. This is how God acts. When Gideon hid, the Lord did not call him for what he was at that moment, but for what he could become. The Lord is with you, a strong and valiant man. Judges 6:12. You too, with your life, showed those who surrounded you who God had called them to be, and not those who were choosing to be. This awareness burns. Watching your reflection and seeing waste, fear, passivity is unbearable. But it is precisely at this moment that the awakening takes place. Because when you stop avoiding the mirror, you can finally start changing. Jesus did not come to condemn, but to save. John 3:17. Still, whoever met his light could no longer pretend to be anything. It had changed forever. Those who looked at you lived the same experience. He could no longer return to being the old self. So what is the next step? When the mirror was broken and the truth has been revealed, we remain with two choices: escape or transform. But there is one thing that makes the escape impossible. There is an invisible wall that separates man from the life that God has prepared for him. A wall made of fears, habits, limiting thoughts. It's a wall that says, I can't. I'm not enough. It's too late. But then suddenly something or someone arrives and breaks down, and that someone was you. You were the tool through which God revealed to those who observed that that wall was not real. It was just a construction of the mind. It is written, God in fact did not give us a spirit of shyness, but of strength, of love and wisdom. 2 Timothy 1:7. Yet how many live as if they were prisoners of a cell whose door has always been open? The human mind is the largest battlefield. Satan knew well when Jesus tried in the desert. He did not link him with chains, he did not physically hit him. He attacked him in the mind, with words, with illusions, trying to deceive him. If you are the Son of God, Matthew 4:3. The same happens today. Many do not advance in life not because they are really blocked, but because they believe they are. But when someone with his life shows that the wall can be shot down, then everything changes. Those who looked at you realized that it was not the circumstances that held him back, but his own mentality. And you were the breach that opened the way. In the Bible, we find stories of men who have lived all their lives behind invisible barriers. Bethesda's paralytic, for example, had remained 38 years lying next to the swimming pool, convinced that he could not change his condition. But one day Jesus looked at him and said to him, "Get up, take your bed and walk." John 5:8. In an instant, his mentality was destroyed and his reality changed. The same happened with the people who had the privilege of crossing your path. You showed them that they were stronger than they believed, that there was a world beyond their comfort zone which could dare, grow, transform themselves. But the truth is that destroying a mental barrier is not painless. It is like waking up suddenly from a deep sleep, with the light that burns the eyes accustomed to darkness. The truth shakes, but free. Many felt exposed, vulnerable, testing. But just at that moment, God started working. It is written, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." John 8:32. And the truth you brought was a key, an open door towards a new beginning. And now when the wall has fallen and the road is free, it remains a single question. Will they have the courage to walk? Or will they worsen the old chains for fear of what awaits them on the other side? But there is something that will no longer be able to ignore. Fear is a silent shadow that follows every step of man. Sometimes he disguises himself with prudence, other times as common sense. But in reality, it is an invisible chain that imprisons, limits, paralyzed. And the truth is that many do not want to face it. They prefer to ignore it, find excuses, stay in the comfort area. But you didn't allow it to it. You were the tool that God used to bring them face to face with what terrified them. You have removed every escape route, every justification. You placed them in front of a mirror where they could no longer lie to themselves. And just like in the Bible, when Josue found himself in front of the promised land full of giants, there was only a command from God. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear and not scare you, because the Lord, your God, is with you wherever you go. Josue 1:9. But facing fear is never easy. Moses trembled before returning to Egypt. Davide was just a boy in front of Goliath. Pietro was afraid of walking on the waters. However, each of them had two choices: surrender or trust God. The same happened with those who looked at your life. In you they saw someone who did not let themselves be stopped by fear, someone who walked even when he did not see the whole way, someone who chose faith rather than fear. And this put them in crisis, because if you could do it, then they had no more excuses not to do them too. And this is where the transformation begins. Fear has a secret. It is not real, or rather, it is real only as long as you believe it is. The people of Israel wandered in the desert for 40 years because he was afraid of what was waiting for them in the promised land. But do you know how long it took to cross it? Only 11 days. 11 days of walking that became 4 decades of suffering because they let themselves be dominated by fear. And the same thing still happens today. Many remain blocked for years, unable to make a decision, to risk, to trust God. But when someone, like you, shows them that fear is not a real obstacle, their world crumbles. The truth is that fear dissolves only when it is faced. God never promised to take it off, but promised to give us the courage to overcome it. You have been the voice that he told them what no one else had the courage to say. If you don't face this fear, you will bring you this regret for life. And at that moment, they realized that staying still was more painful than advancing. Because the weight of fear is nothing compared to the weight of regret. And now that the fear has been unmasked, They can no longer pretend not to see it. They only have two choices: to remain prisoners or advance with faith. But there is a problem. Their old justifications are collapsing, and the next thing you did has put them even more to the narrow. Humans are masters in creating justifications for their immobility. I don't have time. It's not the right time. I'm not ready. These sentences become like a mantra repeated to infinity, a lullaby that cradles the soul and keeps it asleep. But then, something happens. Someone arrives who does not accept those apologies. Someone who with his life shows that they are only illusions, that the perfect time does not exist, that preparation takes place along the way and not before starting, and that someone was you. Your existence has become a living proof that those excuses were only lies disguised as reasonableness, and this made them unbearable. Look at Moses. When God called him, his first answer was a list of apologies. Who am I to go to the Pharaoh? I can't speak well, and if they don't believe me, Exodus chapter 4, 10-13. But God did not accept his justifications. He gave him a stick, sent him forward, and only said one thing to him: I will be with you. This is the point. God does not want to listen to our apologies. He wants our obedience. And the people who saw your life noticed an uncomfortable truth. While they found excuses, you aggravate. While they waited for the right moment, you created it. And this made them feel naked in front of reality. The problem of apologies is that the more you repeat them, the more they become your truth. But when someone shows that they are only alibi, they suddenly become unbearable. You can no longer sleep peacefully knowing that the problem is not time, neither circumstances nor opportunities, but the lack of action. When Jesus met the man with his hand paralyzed in the synagogue, he did not allow him to remain in his condition. He didn't say to him, "Wait a sign from heaven." No, he commanded him, "Spread your hand." Matthew 12:13. The miracle did not come before the action. They came together. And whoever observed you understood that God does not bless those who remain firm, but who dares to move. Do you know what is the worst thing that someone can happen? Realize that he lived years justifying himself. Not at all. And that's what happened to those who looked at you. The weight of their excuses has become unsustainable. Bugey could no longer be told. They couldn't say, "I can't say," when you showed you can. They could no longer say, "I'm not capable," when you showed that the only real inability is the fear of trying. They could no longer say, "Is not the right time," when they saw that the right time never comes. It is created. So what remains when the apologies no longer work? Only two possibilities. Either you change, or you agree to live in regret. But just when they seemed about to surrender, you did something even more powerful. The inspiration is like the wind. It comes. It shakes you for a moment and then disappears. But shame remains. It is a fire that burns inside, a silent torment that does not allow you to stay still. And you, without even realizing it, have turned on that fire in them. Not with sweet words, not with a kind encouragement, but with your life. You have not inspired them, you compared them with their mediocrity. And it is precisely this difference that caused their change. Because those who feel inspired often say, "How nice, I would also like," but then it does nothing. Those who feel humiliated by their current state, however, can no longer tolerate it and starts action. Do you remember when Pietro denied Jesus? 3 times he said he didn't know him. But then when the rooster sang, his eyes met those of Christ. At that moment, Pietro was not inspired. He was crushed by shame. And Pietro came out and cried bitterly. Luke 22:62. But just that shame transformed him. He pushed him to become the rock on which the church would have been built. Shame forced him to change. And so it was for those who looked at you. They saw their wasted potential, the opportunities ignored, the time lost, and they could no longer accept it. People live trying to protect their image, to tell each other that they are doing the best they can. But when they find themselves in front of someone who feels the opposite with his life, all this self-defense collapses. Think of the parable of the talents. The servant who hid his talent had a ready justification. I was afraid. But the answer of the Lord was hard. Evil servant and lazy. Matthew 25:26. He did not consult it. He did not encourage him. I will unmask him. And at that moment the servant understood that his fear was not an acceptable excuse. The same thing happened to those who observed you. They could no longer protect their mediocre choices. They could no longer hide behind the "I will do tomorrow," because you showed every day that tomorrow is not guaranteed. But the shame, if managed well, can be the largest ally of the transformation, because it is the intolerance towards oneself that pushes to change. It is the disgust for your own stagnation that makes you move. And whoever saw you could no longer live in the lie. He could no longer look in the mirror and accept the old version of himself, because now he knew there was more. He knew that God had set a fire inside him, and that there were no more excuses to let him turn off. And now that the fire is on and the old life is no longer bearable, a new threat arises. Time awaits anyone, and the risk of being left behind is more real than ever. Competition is a powerful force. Even those who say they are not competitive feel the weight of the comparison. Nobody wants to be left behind. Nobody wants to see someone else advance while it remains firm. And you, without even wanting to, have become their point of reference. Not because I tried to overcome someone, but because your discipline, your commitment, and your growth have triggered something within them. If you could improve, why don't they? If you managed to make sacrifices, why did they continue to postpone? If you advanced every day, why were they stuck? This was the question that could no longer ignore. In the Bible, we see this phenomenon several times. Saul and Davide are a perfect example. At the beginning, Saul saw Davide as a simple servant, a young shepherd. But then, the people began to sing. Saul killed 1,000, but Davide 10,000. 1 Samuel 18:7. At that moment, something broke in Saul. He could no longer ignore the fact that David had become his rival. It was not Davide who challenged him. It was his own insecurity that made him a threat. The same thing happened with those who observed you. You never challenged them openly, you never told them what they had to do, but the mere fact that you existed as living test that the change was possible forced them to enter an invisible competition. And it's not just about success. These are energy, spirit, way of life. Those who saw you have perceived your determination and had to compare it with their laziness. This is the real reason why some have started to change. They didn't want to be the ones who remained behind, who looked at life to flow without being part of it. And then they started running. Perhaps at the beginning they did it only not to lose their pace, but in the process they discovered something bigger, a better version of themselves. Jesus himself aroused this type of reaction. When he spoke, people felt tested. The Pharisees, for example, could not stand it. Not because Jesus attacked them directly, but because with his life and words he showed that their religiosity was empty. And that's why they tried to test him, to discredit him, to find a reason to stop him. But the truth was that its existence itself was a judgment on their mediocrity. And whoever observed your life lived the same torment. He could no longer pretend anything. The question is now, how long they will be able to resist without evolving. Because the more advanced, the more the distance between you became evident. And nobody wants to be what remains behind. But the biggest fear is not this either. It is another. It is the fear of becoming irrelevant, of being forgotten, of being replaced. And it is precisely this fear that pushed them even more. Nothing scares more than the idea of being forgotten, be replaced, overcome, left behind. The human ego deludes itself that it is indispensable, of having all the time in the world, of being able to postpone the change without consequences. But then, suddenly, someone comes who shows the opposite. Someone who advances without waiting. For anyone who grows, who evolves, who transforms himself. And that someone was you. Without wanting it, you sent a clear message. Life doesn't wait. If you don't move, someone else will do it for you. Think of the parable of the 10 virgins. 5 were wise and had oil for their lamps. The other 5 were foolish, and they noticed too late that they were about to stay out. They ran to look for the oil, but when they returned, the door was already closed. "Lord, appreci," how they shouted, but the answer was devastating. "I don't know you." Matthew 25:11-12. That moment of realization is frightening. Understanding that we arrived too late, that something unrepeatable has been lost, which has been replaced. And those who observed you lived this fear about their skin. For years they have believed they have time, that they can postpone, that they can stay still without consequences. But then they saw you and they realized that while they were waiting for the right moment, others were already doing. While they complained about the lack of opportunities, others were creating them. While they remained in comfort zone, you were already 3 steps forward, and this has changed everything. Because nobody wants to be what is left behind. Even in the Bible, we see people who have lost their opportunity for lack of action. Esau sold its firstborn for a plate of lentils, Genesis 25:34. When he realized his stupidity, it was too late. His place had already been taken. The same happened to Saul. God had chosen him as king, but for his disobedience his position was given to Davide, 1 Samuel 16:1. This is a spiritual principle. Those who do not move are replaced. Those who do not make fruit what God has given him, he loses him. And this awareness is what triggered the transformation into those who have seen your life. They didn't want to be the one who one day would look back with regret saying, "I could be more, I could do more, but I waited too long." And so they started moving, not by inspiration, not out of enthusiasm, but for fear of what would have happened if they hadn't done it. Because they knew that life goes on, with or without them. And just when they were starting to react, you did something even more powerful. You showed them a taste of what they could become, and then you took it off. And that was the final blow. There is a more painful thing than bankruptcy, touching success and then losing it. Nothing hurts more than savoring an anticipation of the size and then return to mediocrity. And this is exactly what you did. You opened a door, you showed them what was possible, you made them feel for a moment what it meant to live without fear, without apologies, without chains, and then you left them alone with their reality, and that destroyed them. It is the same strategy that God used with the people of Israel. Before led them to the promised land, he sent 12 explorers to see it. Numbers 13, 1-2. 10 of them returned full of fear, saying that they could never conquer it. But 2, Josue and Caleb, said, "If the Lord is pleased with us, he will give it to us." Numbers 14, 8. Do you know what the saddest part is? The people had already seen the earth with their own eyes. They knew what was waiting for them. But since they did not have the courage to advance, God made them wander in the desert for 40 years, until everyone died, without ever setting foot in the land they had seen. And that's what you did. You allowed them to see what would happen if they had chosen to evolve. You gave them a taste of their better version, of the life they could have lived, of the freedom they could have tried. But then you left them with a choice, or act and grab it, or look at her fading before their eyes. And this is a torture worse than anything else. Think of the rich man of the parable of Lazarus. For all his life he had had comfort, luxury, abundance. But when he died and found himself in hell, he saw Abraham and Lazarus in the breast of glory. Luke 16:23. Seeing what he could have, and knowing that he could no longer get it, was the greatest torment. And whoever observed you tried exactly the same thing. They saw with their eyes what it meant to live with courage, determination, faith. They felt within themselves the call of their true potential. But when they hesitated, they saw that opportunity to slip away. And now that they have tasted freedom and know that it exists, they will never be able to return to being the same. But this is not enough, because there is a voice in their head that continues to torment them. A voice that does not come from you but from their own conscience, a voice that can no longer turn off. The truth does not comfort, the truth shakes. The truth is not that sweet word that makes you feel good with yourself. It is that fist in the stomach that forces you to look inside you. without filters, without apologies. And you didn't talk to others for pleasure. You talked to waking them. You said what nobody had the courage to say, and for this reason your words continued to persecute them even when the day was over. Jesus Christ had not come to tell people what he wanted to hear. He had come to say what they had to hear. When the rich young man asked him how to get eternal life, he expected a simple answer. Perhaps something that confirmed that he was already doing enough. But Jesus said to him, "Go, sell everything you have from the poor and you will have a treasure in the sky. Then come and follow me." Matthew 19:21. That word hit him so deeply that he could not stand it. He left sad because he knew that this was the truth. But he was not ready to accept it. And so it was with those who listened to you. They expected words of comfort, received words of confrontation. They expected encouragement, received a mirror. And that mirror tormented them, because your words were not easy to ignore. They were like a seed planted in the mind, a voice that returned to the most uncomfortable moments, when they were alone, when the world was silent, when they tried to sleep but thoughts did not leave them alone. This is the power of truth. It is not pleasant, but it is necessary. When Jesus said, "Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but those who lose their lives for my cause will find it." Matthew 16:25. He was not trying to be popular. He was waking up people from their spiritual torpor, and you did the same. You didn't give them what they wanted. You gave them what they needed, and now they can no longer go back. Because the truth, once known, cannot be forgotten. But the biggest problem is not even this. The problem is that you have activated something within them who will no longer be able to turn off. Something that has to do with the survival of their soul itself. When life is in danger, every distraction disappears. The survival instinct takes over and everything that first seemed important becomes insignificant. And you did exactly this. You showed them that remaining the same was no longer an option. You made them understand that their future, their destiny, their spiritual legacy were at stake. And when the stakes are so high, apathy dies, and the action becomes inevitable. In the Bible, we see God many times to use this mechanism to push his people to change. When the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, for 400 years they had accepted their condition. But when the situation became unbearable, when their spirit could no longer bear oppression, they shouted to God, and God replied, "The cry of the Israelites has come to me, and I saw the oppression with which the Egyptians torment them." Exodus 3:9. The pain woke up. The fear of losing everything has made them shout, and their liberation began in that cry. And that's exactly what happened with the people who observed you. Until then, they had lived in the illusion that there was always time, that the change was an option and not a necessity. But then they saw you. They saw that while they were waiting, the world went on. They realized that staying still meant losing everything. And when the loss becomes a real threat, the survival instinct turns on. Look at the story of Noah. For years he built an ark while everyone laughed at him. But then, when the rain began to fall, when the waters climbed, when the danger became real, it was too late. And the door was closed. Genesis 7:16. Those who had laughed now screamed. Those who had ignored now were looking for an escape route. But the opportunity had passed. And this is the fear you have triggered in them. The fear of staying out, of losing the moment, to wake up one day and understand that it was too late. Now they know that life does not wait. Now they know that every day lost is one step less towards its realization. Now they can no longer postpone. Because time does not forgive, and those who do not move risk being left behind forever. But as strong as the survival instinct is, there is an even more dangerous illusion that you have to destroy. The idea that someone will come to save them. For all their lives, most people live with a hidden belief. Someone sooner or later will be saved. Perhaps fate will bring a perfect opportunity. Perhaps God will solve everything without having to move a finger. Perhaps something will happen one day that will change their lives. But then they were forced to look at you, and they understood the truth. Nobody would come to save them. There was no knight on a white horse. There was no secret plan already written for their success. There was only one choice: getting up and fighting, or accepting to stay forever where they were. Even in the Bible, this is one of the hardest lessons to accept. When Israel came out of Egypt and arrived at the Red Sea, what did the people did? He began to complain, expecting God to do everything for them. But God's answer was surprising. Why do I shout to me? Tie to the children of Israel to go on. Exodus 14:15. God did not say, wait and you will see what I will do. No, he told them to move. And only when Moses raised the stick and the people advanced, the sea opened. Salvation was already there, but they had to act, and that's what you did. You destroyed the illusion that someone would come to take them by the hand and take them to the life they wanted. You have shown them that God opens the doors, but we have to cross them. You have shown that faith is not waiting, it is walking, and this caused the castle of illusions they had built. Because for the first time in their life they had to look reality in the face. Their existence was entirely in their hands. Look at the parable of the 10 virgins. 5 were wise and had oil for their lamps. The other 5, however, thought they could borrow the oil of others. But when the bridegroom arrived, they realized that nobody could save them. Go to buy it, the wise people said. Matthew 25:9. But it was too late. The door closed and remained out. And this is what will happen to those who continue to wait instead to act. Now they know that if they don't move, nobody will do it for them. Now they know that if they do not take control of their life, they will always remain in the same point. Now they know that God is with them, but he won't act in their place. So what? Now that the illusion is destroyed and the reality is clear, remains only one question. Is the change really possible? And the answer: you were the one to give it. People don't change because someone tells them they should do it. They change when they see with their own eyes that it is possible, and you have been that living test. Not words, not theories, not temporary motivation, but do. You have shown, without the need for explanations, that the transformation is not an abstract idea but a concrete reality. That faith is not just believe but act. That fear can be defeated, that the discipline brings fruit, that life can be lived with a larger purpose. And whoever observed you could no longer deny it. How many times Jesus has shown with his life what others could not believe. When he healed the sick, when he walked on the waters, when he multiplied the bread, his every gesture was a testimony. He didn't say simply, have faith. He showed what happened when you had faith. If you can believe, everything is possible for those who believe. Mark 9:23. And whoever followed him could no longer pretend to have not seen. And it is the same thing that happened with the people who looked at you. Maybe they once had doubts. Maybe they thought that certain things were reserved for a few. But then they saw you. They saw you persevere when others gave up. They saw you overcome obstacles that they used as apologies. They have seen you become a better version of yourself. And they understood that the change was not a fairy tale. It was real. And it was possible for them too. Look at the story of Paulo. As a persecutor of Christians, it has become one of the greatest apostles of faith. Imagine the shock of those who knew him before. Isn't he who persecuted the church? Acts 9:21. Still, his transformation was so evident that no one could deny it. It had become the living proof that God could change anyone. And who observed, you lived the same experience. They could no longer say is impossible, because they had the demonstration of the opposite before their eyes. Now they know that there are no more excuses. Now they know that change is not a gift for a few, but a choice for anyone who wants it. But there is still one thing that pushes them forward: the fear of a regret that they will never be able to erase. People avoid discipline because they see it as a weight, but they do not realize that there is a much bigger weight, that of regret. Discipline requires sacrifice today. Regret requires it throughout life. And this is exactly what you made to understand who observed you. You showed them that the pain of the action is momentary, but the pain of inertia lasts forever. How many times in the Bible we see people who have missed their opportunity because they didn't have the courage to act? Think about the rich young man. Jesus gave him the opportunity to follow him, to leave everything for a life of eternal purpose. But he hesitated. Hear these words, he was saddened, because he had many wealth. Matthew 19:22. That day he chose comfort instead of the transformation. And what remained? Only regret. The problem of regret is that it always comes too late. When Esau sold his firstborn for a plate of lentils, he thought it wasn't a great loss. But when he understood what he had done, he burst into tears looking for a way to remedy. But it was too late. Even if he requested it with tears, there was no way to repent. Jews 12:17. And whoever observed you understood this hard truth. The lost time does not recover. Until then, they believed they had all the time in the world. I will do ahead when I am ready, when the conditions are better. But then they saw you. They saw someone who did not wait for the right time, but he created it. And suddenly, they understood that they were accumulating regrets instead of progress. And that realization destroyed them. Because the discipline is tiring, but the regret is unbearable. And now that this truth know, they will no longer be able to ignore it. Now they know that any excuse of today is a regret tomorrow. Now they know they can no longer postpone. But the change that started was not a coincidence. It happened because someone put them with their backs to the wall without escape. And it happened because you forced them to choose between evolution and stagnation. Now you know. You have been the turning point in someone's life. Not because you chose it, not because you looked for it, but because your existence itself was a living proof that could no longer be ignored. You shook their certainties. You made their excuses unbearable. You triggered the change. But now I want to know from you, have you ever lived a transformation thanks to someone who, with his example, forced you to look inside you? Write it in the comments, I want to read you. And if this video spoke to you, leave a like, sign up for the channel, and activate notifications, because there are many other truths that you still have to discover. And now, watch the next video you find here on the screen. Because what you will learn there, it could be the piece that is missing from your transformation.